This is my audience of 3 people.
Hi, my name is David Roche, and this is my informative speech about the National Airspace System. The NAS makes up about 29 million square feet of area, and it helps transport about 3 million people in airline flights a year. It exists to outline airspace structure, regulate air traffic, and increase aviation safety. We're going to learn about the system of airspace that makes air travel possible in the US. So when looking at the different classes of airspace we have, most of it is split up into either controlled or uncontrolled airspace. So in controlled airspace, it exists to provide ATC separation services and traffic advisory services. And in uncontrolled airspace, that is when the need for traffic separation and traffic advisory doesn't exist or is impossible to meet. And then here we have the 6 general classes of airspace. I have it listed from most restrictive to least restrictive. So class A would be the most restrictive and class Golf would be the least restrictive. So starting with class Alpha airspace, it extends from 18,000 feet mean sea level up to 60,000 feet. It's usually considered the most restrictive airspace class because it requires an instrument rating to fly into. You also need to request specific ATC clearance when you're flying into class Alpha airspace. And anytime you're taking an airline flight, most of the time you would go through class Alpha airspace just because of how high it is. Next we have class Bravo airspace that usually extends from the ground up to 10,000 feet AGL. And the shape of each class Bravo is going to be specific to each airport. So some examples of class Bravo airports are Phoenix Sky Harbor. There's also some ones that are near us is San Diego International and Las Vegas International, and the shapes of those are all different to help suit the traffic and the terrain environment that surrounds them. When you're entering class Bravo airspace, you do need to request specific clearance to enter, and all aircraft within class Bravo need to have a transponder that transmit their position and altitude. And in class Bravo airspace, those are usually the busiest airports in the United States. And for class Charlie airspace, it's controlled airspace that usually extends from the surface to 4,000 feet above ground level. And just like class Bravo, class Charlie is usually individually designed for each airport. The picture here is Tucson International Airport and David Monthan Air Force Base. And it's kind of an unusual layout because the 2 of them right next to each other. So you have the 2 semicircles that meet together to make one class Charlie zone. In this airspace zone, pilots are required to maintain 2-way radio communication, and you do also require a transponder in this class of airspace that transmits your position and altitude. Most small international airports are class Charlie, and the 2 examples I have here are Tucson International and Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. And then class Delta airspace is a smaller class of airspace. It's controlled airspace that extends from the surface to 2,500 feet AGL. And it's usually shaped as a circle with a radius of 4 nautical miles. They usually exist to help aid the flow of traffic in busier municipal airports, and pilots are required to maintain 2-way radio communication when in class Delta. And usually, class Delta airports are usually satellite airports to busier airports, such as class Bravo airports. The Phoenix area has about 7 class Delta satellite airports that help support the general aviation flow of traffic in the area. And then we have class Echo airspace. That's controlled airspace that can extend from the ground all the way up to 18,000 feet MSL. It exists when ATC needs the ability to issue traffic advisories and traffic separation services. And class Echo airspace is the most bountiful form of airspace in the NAS, and serves as the foundation of most controlled airspace in the US. Most non-tower airports exist inside class Echo airspace, and unlike the other classes of airspace, we're starting to get into more non-regulatory zone communications with ATC and are not required in this form of airspace. Some examples of class Echo in the local area would be Casa Grande Municipal and Coolidge Municipal Airport. And then we have Class Golf airspace, which is uncontrolled airspace that extends from the surface to about 700 feet or 1,200 feet AGL, depending on where you are. Class Golf exists when there's no need for ATC to provide traffic separation services, and you're not required to be an ATC when inside Class Golf airspace, and ATC also cannot provide those services in Class Golf, and it's considered the least restrictive form of airspace. And then, now that we know the general structure of the national airspace system, we can now move on to how that airspace regulates air traffic and increases aviation safety. So the first four that I have are forms of airspace that regulate where and when air traffic can exist, and the last three help supplement aviation safety. So here is an example of a prohibited area. So it's airspace where flight is not allowed for national security reasons. One of the most notable examples of prohibited areas is over the National Mall in Washington, D.C. And here's a graphical representation of that, just that blue circle, and then the designation is P40. And then here is an example of a restricted area, airspace where flight is not allowed due to aircraft hazards. So unlike the prohibited area here, where it'd be not allowed for national security, flight is restricted here due to the existence of aircraft hazards, and they're most commonly located around military training areas where there's maybe target practice or explosives going off that could harm aircraft in the air. And then the next we have is temporary flight restriction. So these are more general airspace closures that can happen for a variety of reasons. The most common ones are because of US government VIPs, national security events, and sports events. In the Phoenix area, the most common and numerous TFR is the one over Chase Field for baseball games. And then we have wildlife protection airspace. It exists over nature refuges or national parks, and it's designed to reduce the effects of aircraft over an ecosystem. In these places, flight below 2,000 feet AGL is prohibited, and the wildlife protection airspace, it exists to help protect the ecosystem in the area, but it also protects the guest experience in the area. And then next, so now we're moving on to forms of airspace that help supplement aviation safety. So here we have a military operating area. It's an advisory airspace zone that warns pilots to be vigilant because hazardous aircraft may exist. So this would be different than the restricted area, in that restricted areas usually have hazards that they don't want aircraft to be flying through at all. This is slightly different than a restricted area. It usually consists of military aircraft operations where it's not harmful to other aircraft, but you need to be vigilant when you're passing through the airspace. It usually consists of high-speed aircraft maneuvering either really high or really low. And then next we have alert areas. So these are meant to, it's airspace that's flagged to warn pilots about extensive or unusual pilot activity. So these are around areas of really congested military or civilian aircraft training, where it's similar to an MOA, but it's not quite focused on the military aspect other than the traffic aspect of it. Next, we have a special flight rules area. It's defined as airspace with special regulations that exist to increase safety. So these exist, I have an example here of Grand Canyon. They also exist over the Hudson River in New York and within 30 nautical mile circle around Washington, D.C. They mainly exist to regulate the airflow of traffic to prevent airspace incursions within it and to increase safety in those areas just because of the popularity and the congestion that can exist there. And why does all the airspace here exist? It's adopted to organize airspace, dictate where air traffic can travel, and increase safety for air missions. The next time you take a flight, you should take a second to think about the complex air system that exists to make air traffic safe and efficient.